Great. Hi, everybody. Welcome back. I'm glad to have you here for this third in the three-part series looking at the research aspects of the asset building cohort. I will say we had some great discussion over the last two sessions. The second in the three-part series was optional, really focused on people doing opt-out savings accounts. So some of you may have been there, some of you not. I will say that the questions and the comments that came up there really gave the research team and HUD a lot of really good food for thought. Knowing what you're thinking, what you're planning, what you're struggling with, made some really great conversation and brought up some very important points. So I really encourage you to share your thoughts as we go through the presentation today. As Sean was saying, please do use the chat box as we go through, address your questions to everyone if you have questions as we go, and at break points, we'll make sure that we get to those at those breaks, and we'll have several breaks as we go. We'll give you a chance to come off mute and just have some conversation too. So let's take a look at our presenters. This is the same group of presenters you will remember from the first webinar. From PD&R, we'll have Elizabeth Rudd, and from the MTW office, Allison Christensen, both from headquarters. And then Sam Elkin and Steve Nunez from MEF will be doing the bulk of the presentation for you today, and they're teaming with the APT team for doing their research planning. So with that, Steve, I will turn over to you.
Hi, thanks, Janet. Hi, everybody, welcome. Before I start, I just want to say thanks to my colleague, Claire McMahon-Fishman, who put a lot of work into building this presentation. This is just an overview of what the presentation is going to look like. We're going to start out just giving a little bit of background on rent reporting, why it's important, and what sorts of challenges people face in terms of building credit. We're going to get very quickly to the selection notice requirements, which is, I think, mostly a refresher, but we wanted to present it. I think last time there were a whole lot of questions, last time meaning the first session on the research overview, about what research would look like for particular programs. And since that session was really designed to just be an overview that was general to everybody, regardless of whether they were doing opt-out savings, rent reporting, or their own design, we couldn't really get into details there. Now we are going to get into details to discuss what our best senses right now of what research is going to look like for the rent reporting programs. We are also going to provide some recommendations that are derived from our conversations with experts and from our read of the literature on, I guess, best practices for implementing your rent reporting program, and also for outreach and engagement. Now, throughout the session, there are going to be pauses where you're going to have an opportunity to ask questions and to sort of discuss your concerns or your thoughts. Unlike the first session, instead of doing it all at once, we're going to do it broken up into different sections, so you have a chance to ask about the previous section. I also just want to remind everybody that we are in the middle of scheduling one-on-one sessions with the individual public housing authorities so that you will have time to meet with the research team and ask maybe questions that are specific to your program or questions that we can't answer in sufficient depth here. So if you haven't already received an invitation for that, certainly let us know, but I think everybody has been in contact with our research team. So with that, let's go on to the next slide. And as I said, we're going to go onto background here. So these next couple of slides are about the need for rent reporting and why it's important. And here, what we have is, I guess, the crux of the problem, which is, you'll see in the second bullet point right there, which is credit reports include past credit usage, but not your current ability to pay, which kind of creates a little bit of a catch-22. It's hard for you to get credit if you don't already have credit, or to build good credit if you don't already have good credit. And that's a problem. People who have no credit score, or who have very poor credit score, have a lot of difficulty establishing themselves and sort of repairing their credit as necessary. And public housing residents are more likely than the general population to be in this scenario where they have no credit score or a subprime credit score. And you could think here that rent reporting is a potential solution. Basically, you have a large payment being made on regularly that could show creditworthiness, could demonstrate that you have the ability to pay on a monthly basis, and to pay consistently and on time. However, while landlords in general have over the last few years begun to very regularly check credit histories and credit reports when they are screening applicants for a rental, they have not gotten into the habit yet of reporting on rent payments, which means that there's a huge source of information about creditworthiness that is just not getting to the credit bureaus. So this is an instance where people in public housing can benefit, because you have the information and you are able to get that information into the credit bureau's hands, which will allow them to throw that into their models and to help, in most instances, sort of build a credit history that could have a lot of important impacts on people's lives. If we go to the next slide, I think we talk a little bit about what that means. Financial inclusion means access to safe, lower cost credit. So, at the very sort of basic level, having a credit score and having a good credit score greatly increases your opportunity and your options when it comes to actually paying for things, whether it be a large purchase, like a refrigerator or something like that, or dealing with an unexpected expense. And in the absence of that, you may end up instead dealing with something like payday loans, car title loans, pawn shops, and even when you're purchasing something, having to use something like rent to own rather than simply using a credit card to buy something. And that means huge interest rates, effective interest rates. And it can also mean enormous debt service on a month-to-month basis, meaning that people essentially have to put a large amount of their money every month, a large amount of their income, to paying off this debt. And that means that they don't have any slack. So if they're trying to build savings and they're trying to get above water, having that large debt service could be a huge issue. So establishing credit and establishing good credit, there's kind of two sides of this: is bringing in more income, but also sending out less income, into things like payday loan repayments and so forth. And it's that latter piece that rent reporting can actually add to. But beyond that, beyond just access to that, these credit products, mainstream credit products, you also have issues with, as I mentioned, being able to have access to different rental properties, depending on, in choice neighborhoods or in buildings that people want to get into. Landlords are increasingly using the credit score to screen people, and that means an option that is sort of lost for this population. The same thing with jobs. Employers will, depending on the job, do a credit history check, and that could mean that some of the better jobs out there, some of the ones that could help people really establish themselves, might be out of reach. But even if you don't have a credit score, even if you do have a credit score, you may have a subprime credit score. So even people who already have established credit could potentially benefit from a program that helps them improve it, simply because things like credit cards and loans and so forth, the sort of interest that you have to pay on that derives in part from your credit score. So if you have a subprime credit score, you may end up in a situation where you're paying a much larger interest rate. So there's a lot of different ways in which this could potentially help people and help them sort of get to a place of overall financial well-being and even start to accumulate savings and sort of prepare for the future in a variety of ways. So let's go to the next slide. We're going to go now to the selection notice requirements. And here, I'm going to go over just very briefly what the notice requires in terms of the actual program structure. And then we're going to move on from there to some, I guess, preview of our research about recommendations to HUD. Let's go to the next slide. So these are the program requirements under the selection notice. You must regularly report payments to for participating public housing households to at least one credit bureau. I want to draw your attention to this bullet point here, which says you can report either all payments or on-time payments only. The on-time payments only is something that we were calling, I think, positive reporting only. Although it wasn't clear, I guess, on the selection notice, I think it is HUD's understanding and it's our understanding that that positive only reporting has become the industry standard. And if that is what you would like to do, that is perfectly acceptable. And in fact, I think when we talk more about this later in the session, my colleague Sam will heartily suggest that you do positive only payment reporting if possible. Being in this program requires informed consent. I want to point out that that is separate from, although related to research-informed consent, which is for the study itself. But it's basically making sure that people understand what this program is, how their data is going to be used, and how they might benefit. Unlike the opt-out savings program, this is very much an opt-in savings program. So, or an opt-in asset building and financial empowerment program. So people need to understand what it is that they're going to be participating in. The program must run for at least the 2-month period. Individuals can disenroll at any time. And I think this one's very important, which is that all public housing households are eligible. It says very specifically in the selection notice that you cannot exclude households run by elderly or disabled persons. But more generally, you cannot target this program in the sense that you cannot make it only available to a subset of households according to their household characteristics. Obviously, not everybody has to participate in the program, but they all have to be eligible and it has to be available for them, regardless of what their household looks like. And the minimum requirement here is that you offer it to at least 25 public housing households. And that can be, you can provide the service to up to 50% of your entire population of public housing households. We're going to go on to the next slide now. So I'm going to put a bunch of provisos and disclaimers on this. MEF and APT are tasked during this design period to present recommendations to HUD for how the evaluation should look. So what you're seeing here on this page are our current evaluation recommendations. This is subject to change because it's subject to HUD feedback, and it's also going to be reviewed further by our expert panel and external reviewers. But as of now, this is what we are thinking. So that's just to give you a sense that it's possible that this could change, although I think that this is the basic structure that we're looking for here. And what we have is that the recruitment for the program and the study are going to take place during a 3-month period. And ideally, we'd like that to start in October 2023. That's somewhat out of our hands because all of the paperwork, all of the design stuff has to be approved by the government more broadly. And sometimes there could be a delay, but assuming everything goes according to plan, All of that will be in place for a launch in October 2023. What that means for you guys is that when the recruitment starts, you are going to be tasked during the enrollment into the program with also administering the study-informed consent form and a short questionnaire at enrollment. The study-informed consent form is to make sure, for research purposes, for ethical purposes, that people understand exactly what this research is, what it means to be in a study, what their rights are, how we're going to use their data, and what kind of data we're going to collect, and of course, how we're going to protect that data and to ensure their privacy. That short questionnaire is just to get at some information that we can't easily get at from administrative records, and also perhaps to help get some additional contact information to help the research team down the line when they're reaching out to people for surveys. In both instances, these are fairly sort of short processes that the evaluators are going to work to integrate into your sort of enrollment process, and they're certainly going to provide training and support for you to do this. This is something that we have done and that other evaluators have done many times with public housing authorities over the years, and we don't think that this is going to be burdensome. At the end of the 3-month period, the evaluators are going to take the entire group of people who were entered into the study and into the program, and all at once randomly assign them to either the program or control group. So that means that during the individual enrollment, nobody's going to be pressing a button and saying, this is the control, this is the program. That's all going to be done separately at the end of the 3-month enrollment period. And you're not going to be the people doing it. The evaluators are going to be doing it. The evaluators will inform you of which households have been entered into the program at that stage. And then you would be free from that point to inform the people in the program group that they are in fact going to be in the rent reporting program, and to begin reporting their rent. So I think with that, we are going to move on to the next slide. And the next slide is an opportunity to ask questions about this particular section of the presentation. And I'm going to turn it back over to Janet to facilitate that. So thank you very much.
Great. Thank you, Steve. All right, everyone. So go ahead. You can use the chat or you can come off mute. Maybe we can start with the requirements in the selection notice that Steve went over. So the issue of, are you reporting all or only on-time payments? The informed consent requirement, the requirement about who has to be included and everybody having to be eligible, and the number of households you need to select. That was a recap of what's in the selection notice. So there may not be a lot of questions on that, but anything you want to ask or observe on that? Okay. Looks like we've got one from Sharon about how they should decide what households get selected. Steve, you want to do a recap on that?
So I guess I want to sort of split the hair here between is eligible for and your marketing efforts. So, and Sam is going to go into this in a bit more detail, right? There are particular types of households that are much more likely to benefit from this program than others. And, as a bit of a preview, you're quite free in your marketing materials and in your conversations with the housing residents to point out who is likely to benefit and to why it would be valuable for them to participate. However, our understanding, and sort of Allison or Elizabeth can jump in if this isn't correct, is everybody has to be eligible. So you can't, for example, say we're only going to recruit people who we've determined have, assets below this level or above this level, or income above this level or below this level. And if people come in to the study into the program upon hearing about this, even if they're not the type of household that maybe you had in mind, once they go through informed consent and they understand the program and they understand the potential risks and benefits and challenges and so forth, if they want to participate in the program, you have to allow them to participate in the program because all households have to be eligible.
Can I just follow up, Steve?
Yes.
But the households that participate in rent reporting, so there's going to be households that participate in the study, and some of them will be participating in rent reporting, and some of them will be in the control group. And to select those who are participating in rent reporting, there's going to be a random method, and the evaluation research team will figure out how to do that. It will just be random.
Yeah, within the pool of people who come forward and sign up for the study, 50% of them, completely at random, will be chosen to actually receive the program.
I was going to maybe just kind of state it another way. So you have your marketing materials, which are available to everyone in all your residents in your public housing programs. And then you have the residents, the households that step forward and say, I'm interested in having my rent reported. They go through the process. And then of that, those interested people that go through the process, 50% will be in the control group and 50% will be in the program group that will get the rent reporting. So kind of who gets selected is sort of at the first point up to the residents, because they have to come forward and say, I'm interested. And then once they say they're interested, then they'll be randomly assigned, as Steve described. That's just kind of another way to state it. It's helpful.
If I could, I'd like to jump to a related question that came in from Jamila. If the residents who get selected for the control group, so there's going to be, you've got the people who are interested, the researchers are going to do their random assignment. One group is control, one group is treatment. If they're selected for the control group and they're upset that they're not actually going to get their opportunity to do rent reporting, can they be switched to the study group?
That they cannot. So the only way this research works is if there is that division between the two groups, the program group and the control group. When you do the random assignment, what ends up happening is, in very brief terms, on average, everybody is the same across the groups, right? So the only difference then between the two groups is participation in the program that you're interested in. So then down the road, if you find a difference in outcomes, the researchers can be confident that the reason why you found that difference in outcomes is because of the program. They can assign, credit to the program for that. If people from the control group find their way into a program, then that sort of diminishes that contrast, and it makes it very difficult for the researchers to answer the question that the studies is set up to answer. I will say, though, that there's nothing wrong with saying to people who are in the control group that after the study period is done, which is this 2-year period, that you, at your discretion, the PHA can enroll them in a rent reporting program. It's only during the study time that this sort of separation has to continue.
Yeah, that's a really good point, Steve. And I wanted to follow up on that as well and say one way to frame it, of course, probably PHAs know better than I do about how to frame it, but one way to frame it is we actually don't know how beneficial this will be, and we're going to find out. And if it turns out to be a good thing, then other people will have opportunities for it. Something like that.
I think that's right too. I mean, just from a research perspective, if you already know the answer, then you don't do this kind of research. And honestly, just from when we're talking about informed consent and so forth, the people who oversee the research wouldn't be happy with that anyway, right? So there has to be a real question about the potential effectiveness of this. in order for this kind of random assignment study to occur.
Great. Thank you, guys. Allison, I'm going to turn to a MTW process question. Mitzi's asking, do we need to have our agency plan and MTW plan approved before we start the process in October?
Yes, so that's a very unique question to this specific part of the cohort. So rent reporting does actually not require any MTW specific flexibility. So you would not need an approved MTW supplement to begin enrollment here. So that's very specific to just the rent reporting that's a part of the cohort. For the rest of your MTW program, obviously you have to have a supplement approved before you start any of that. But since rent reporting does not invoke any MTW specific flexibility, it's not required here. The one caveat I will say for that is for any of the PHAs that applied under the third option, the PHA designed option, where you have a savings component that is kind of together with your rent reporting requirement, that may require that cohort specific waiver that is in the selection notice, and that would need to be approved through an MTW supplement. So we're going to be having some, I think Steve might have referenced this at the beginning, kind of those individual conversations with PHAs. So if you have any concerns about that, definitely bring that up at the time. But if you are only doing rent reporting, then it's not required that you have an MTW supplement in place.
Great, thank you. Let me go to a question from Sandra, and I think, Steve, this is going to come back to you. If a family does not pay their rent on time, is it the case that they would not report anything and the family would unenroll, or would they just report nothing for that 1 month?
Just nothing for that 1 month. So you're only reporting when there is a positive event, meaning that they've paid their full rent on time. You don't need to enroll them from the program. Although, as I noted, a household is always free to unenroll or disenroll from the rent reporting program at any point if they no longer want to participate.
Sandra, does that get you clear?
There is one small caveat to that, which I'm going to talk about when I get to my slides, which is that we'll be talking about engaging third parties to do the rent reporting for you, and some of them have their own rules. But it wouldn't be the case that if they miss 1 month that they'd be unenrolled.
Great. Okay, and Sandra says she's good there. All right. There are a couple follow-up questions, but I'm gonna, since we're not on those topics anymore, I'll just kind of take these in order. Mitzi is asking if there is funding available to assist with the cost of having the vendor provide the rent payment information to the credit bureau. Let's see, Allison, let me maybe turn to you on that one about whether there's funding available. How are they supposed to pay these vendors?
Sure, that's a great question, and that's why we tried to keep the numbers of the households that are required relatively small to make as much assistance with the cost as possible. But there isn't any direct funding to MTW agencies for that purpose. You do have the power of MTW to kind of streamline your programs and hopefully realize some cost savings in those ways. So there's a lot of savings that you can incur with MTW. And then you also have the funding flexibility available, your fungibility across programs that you can use. And in the substantially the same analysis, you do have a little bit of wiggle room and a cushion for MTW related activities. And this would be one of those type of activities. So you do have the ability to do flexible things with your funding that other housing authorities don't have the ability to do, and we're hoping to use that if you do incur any of those third-party costs.
Great, thanks, Allison. Want to come to a follow-up from Jamila. This was the question about you've got a control and a treatment group. Steve, you explained that you really have to keep those separate for the 2 years of the study. And Jamila just wants to confirm that she's understanding correctly that the control group people, once they're in the control group, they cannot be part of the rent reporting until the 2-year period is over. So they'd have to wait that full 2 years. But at that point, the PHA would have some flexibility. Is that an accurate statement?
That is an accurate statement. So if you wanted to say at the end of that 2-year period that everybody in the control can now join up the rent reporting program, you would have the option to do that, yes. But during that 2-year period, during that 2-year period, we need that division.
Great. And then I'm not sure who's going to be right for this one. Jen is wondering about the timeline for marketing it out. Let's speak on that one. Is that maybe not part of what the research team has been thinking about, that's really up to the PHAs?
I mean, I think we have some suggestions in this session about that, and certainly over the next few weeks, we'd like to meet and talk with everybody and hear about your plans. But I don't think we have a specific, target date for when the marketing needs to start.
Yeah, I mean, I think the one thing I'd add on that is that I think our current projection of when the study would be able to launch and when we'd be asking you guys to start providing the rent reporting is around October. Obviously, timelines sometimes shift a little bit, so I'm saying around October instead of definitely in October. I don't think that there's, a reason why you wouldn't be able to kind of give a little bit of a heads up that it's coming beforehand, but I don't think we'd actually be kind of available to work with you on that to kind of help you think about how to do the marketing much before that time.
I wanted to somebody poked me and made a quick question, a good point, which is when it comes to the control group, by the way, we're only talking about the rent reporting program specifically. So if there are other services, other sort of things that you typically provide to all of your residents, the control group can get those things too, right? So it's business as usual, except for the rent reporting. So there's no need to say like, oh, okay, well, I was going to put you in this other program, but we're just giving you nothing, right? It's the nothing is just rent reporting specifically.
Great. And then another one from Jamila. And Jamila, no sorry here. If you are having the question, so is somebody else. Absolutely sure and certain. So the follow-up question is, the study has to have at least 50 participants, 25 control, 25 study. Is that accurate?
Yes, we want 25 people in the study group. For a variety of technical reasons, having an identical number in the control group is ideal, and that's what we're going to shoot for. So assuming we'll have at least 50 people coming in during the recruitment period, that's what's going to happen. There'll be 25 in the study group, 25 in the control group. That said, bigger numbers are better for research. So if you get a much larger number of interested people, that's great. It's good.
Right. Anything else on this section about the requirements from the selection notice and the proposed enrollment procedures that Steve went through?
Yes, I have a question.
Please.
It's too much to put in the chat, so I raised my hand.
That's great.
Okay, so when we submitted our application, we submitted under the PHA design program for savings, but the reason we did PHA design is because we had a youth component to that. And so we weren't planning to do the credit reporting or the rent reporting. So we also happen to have a very robust resident services program. So we've been looking at credit reporting for some time outside of MTW as well. So can we still do rent reporting on our own as we were proceeding down that path, since it wasn't part of our application, without having to worry about the control group and all of that? Or do you have a different recommendation?
Yeah, I think I can speak to that. So if you were the PHA designed option and you were spoke about your savings program under that, then yeah, we would not consider you having any obligations under the rent report. Like you don't have to do both. So yeah, you would be free to, as long as you were meeting the obligations of the savings program, which was that webinar that we had last week. You know, you would be free to do all your other MTW and PHA related programs, and you know, rent reporting would be part of that.
Okay, thank you.
Thanks, Allison. Anything else before we move on to the next part of the presentation?
I'll just say, when we talk with you, we are going to be interested in knowing what you're planning to do, because that helps us with our research. There are certainly some PHAs that under the PHA designed model did something that kind of relatively neatly fit into opt-out savings, or relatively neatly fit into rent reporting. And then there were others that were distinct, right? And having a good sense of what those programs look like helps us, I guess, determine, you know, to some extent, what research bucket to put you in and what sorts of questions to ask your participants.
Great. All right. If you have more questions that come up, we'll have another opportunity for questions later in the presentation. We can return to these, but for the moment, Sam, why don't I turn it over to you and let you take us into the next segment?
Thank you. So what I will be talking about are some of the kind of options that you face in implementing your rent reporting program, and to the extent that we've got recommendations for you, I'll kind of let you know what those are. This is kind of based on our review of previous research and our review of the experiences of programs that had been involved in that research, as well as some conversation that we have been having with experts in the field. We're going to have a few polls. I think you guys are used to the polls on these kinds of webinars by now. So just FYI, that will kind of pause periodically throughout this to do the polls. The first option that you face, and this was something that Steve had kind of already discussed a bit about, is whether you are going to do full file or positive only reporting. And kind of as a reminder here, full file reporting is that you would be reporting all information about rental payments, and that includes reporting late payments that would then be on the credit bureau's file. It could show up in screening by future landlords. The alternative is to do positive only reporting, and that would mean that you wouldn't be reporting late payments or missed payments. You'd be reporting payments that are made on time and that were made in full, and that would be all that you would be reporting. Credit bureaus consider payments to be on time if they're paid within 30 days of the due date. So it doesn't have to be exactly on that day that it's due, but could be within 30 days. So what are the things to kind of take into account while you're looking at this option? Well, I think as Stephen alluded to before, positive only reporting has kind of become the industry standard, and it's been the most common choice in the rent reporting pilots and that have been kind of tried out before. An advantage of this is obviously it minimizes risks. You know, you're not reporting late payments, so it's not like there's going to be this information that you're reporting that ends up dinging people's credit histories. There's a little bit of a caveat to this that we have to say. It's important to understand that it's possible that there's going to be a small number of people who see their credit scores decrease just based on kind of the particularities of their credit history. And it has to do with things about like the average age of their credit or the mix of their credit. And it's most likely, that would most likely happen for people who actually already have high credit scores. But in the studies that have looked at this before, it wouldn't be more than like 1 or 2% of the people who would be involved in positive only reporting, and it may be less than that for the populations that you're working with. With full file reporting, a potential advantage of it is that you're actually providing more information. So for people who have no credit history or little credit history, there are some cases where kind of having a late but not that late payment reported could help their credit score. but it's also going to be a lot more likely that you're going to be reporting negative, missed payments and stuff that could negatively affect their score. So there's the potential that it could help some people more, but it's also going to be more likely to negatively affect scores too. So, there's some kind of considerations that you can take into account as you're looking at that. How kind of what are the available rent reporting methods and services? That's something I'll talk about in the later slide. Also, how long you expect residents to be in the program. If they're going to be in the program for a long time, maybe a couple of missed payments aren't actually going to be that bad over the course of everything that you're reporting. But I would say that in general, we kind of have a strong recommendation to you guys to consider doing positive only, both because of the lower risk of negatively impacting the scores of the people, of your residents. Also, because it might be an easier sell to them, you will be able to kind of say like, hey, we're going to be reporting your rent payments, and we're not going to be reporting it if we're not going to be reporting your late payments. So it might be easier to kind of get people involved with that. And there's also a kind of research case. We have an interest to the extent that we can do it based on your plans, that if you all kind of have similarly designed programs, it makes it a lot easier for us to kind of understand our findings once we get them from the research. But all of that said, we do want to pause for a second, and we know that some of you have kind of already moved forward with planning, others of you still trying to figure all of this out. So we wanted to ask you what you've been planning.
Thanks, Sam. Sean, if you would please bring up our first poll. Please take a look. If it doesn't pop up for you automatically on the right side of your screen, look in the lower right and see if you can find an icon that lets you select the poll. If you still don't see it, you can always put your answer into the chat. So the question is, which type of reporting are you planning to do? Full file or positive, or are you still deciding? Go ahead and make your choice and then hit that little submit button in the lower right to let us know where you are. And Sean, when you start seeing the responses slow down, feel free to close that poll. Let's see here. Waiting for the results to come up. I know you've gotten some advice that the positive reporting might be beneficial. So looks like you got a couple folks still deciding. One person who responded said they are thinking about full file, and the majority are looking at the positive reporting. Got another positive only in the chat. So for those who are still deciding, anything that you would want to ask your colleagues here that might help you make a choice, or just need a little bit more time to make your decisions? Just come off mute if you'd like to ask a question or share any thoughts. Seems like we've got the majority of folks looking at that positive reporting and got the recommendation from Sam to go that direction. Obviously, you guys are going to have your opportunity in the coming weeks to meet with the research team and dig in a little bit more if you're still undecided and to explore what you might want to be doing. I will just note that Mitzi has responded saying that part of it is going to depend on the vendor options. So I see you nodding, Sam. Is that something that you expected to see?
Not necessarily something that I expected to see, but something that makes sense to me. I know that if you're working with a third-party vendor, which we're going to be talking to in a minute, they may kind of have ways that they do things that you're going to have to work with.
Yeah, great, Mitzi. Jamil, I want to let you know, I do see your question, but I'm going to hold that for a little bit later in the conversation. So we will definitely get back to you on that. All right, so why don't I turn it back over to you, Sam, to continue on your way.
Yeah, thanks. And actually, before moving on, for whoever was the one person who said that you were planning on doing full file, we'd love to hear more about that when we kind of have our one-on-one calls with you. If you so choose to identify yourself in the chat right now, that'll give us kind of the heads up that we know that that's something that we'll need to ask about when we talk to you. but no pressure. But if you want to volunteer who you are, we will follow up with you when we talk to you one-on-one. Next slide, please. All right, so kind of directly relevant to what Mitzi was referring to, different methods of rent reporting. So, so what this slide is showing is that there are these alternative methods for reporting rent, and there's kind of you know, ones which are direct reporting, and then ones which use these third-party reporting services. So, so the third-party reporting services, you know, they can handle most of the work of doing the reporting. Many of them will kind of have other offerings that they do in addition to the reporting, stuff like credit score monitoring or educational services. It does obviously, in kind of getting to the conversation that we just had, it provides less control over the details of how you report. It would give you a little bit less control over which bureaus you report to. And you do have to pay attention to the rules of the services that you're considering. And one of the things that I kind of alluded to before, we know that one of the really popular ones is Isuzu, and they do positive only reporting, but they do have a policy of, or at least the last that we kind of looked into this, they had a policy of suspending residents who had late payments for 6 months. So, you know, that would be something that you would need to take into account as you're considering them as a third-party option. And if you're considering other options, you kind of wanted to look into understand what kinds of policies they have so that you, A, can kind of make the informed choice, and then B, once you've committed to working with a third party, you would be able to talk to your the participants about it. In other cases, you know, you would be doing direct reporting, but you know, the different ways of doing that, you could become credentialed to report yourself directly to the bureaus. Some of you may have property management or payment processing platforms already that have rent reporting functionality. So that would be another way of doing it. And then finally, and this would only be an option for the PHA design, for those of you who have taken the PHA designed option, tenants could report themselves. Now that's only going to be kind of relevant in the case of vouchers, and that's why it's only relevant for the PHA designed options, because in the option that was kind of prepackaged, that didn't incorporate voucher holders. So, you know, again, we have a recommendation for you here. It's something for you to kind of take into account. This is based on our conversations with experts so far. But you know, we think that third-party reporting is likely to be the simplest way for most of you to do this. Now, as I said, there are kind of potential drawbacks. You'll have to look into their policies and understand them right. But it's gonna, if you are not already credentialed to report directly to bureaus, there's a whole process to get there. So, and that can be very time-consuming. It requires dedicated resources to do. It's going to be kind of all on you to do it. And so this is more a recommendation out of kind of our take on what's going to make life easier for you than anything that's kind of tied to the study or to requirements from HUD or anything. But we do kind of strongly encourage you to look at the third-party option, because we think that that's going to be by far the simplest way to do it. Again, after making that strong recommendation, I'll say the same thing I said before, which is we know some of you have already moved ahead with planning in one way or the other, so we want to know kind of what you've been thinking so far.
Great. Thanks, Sam. Let's pull up poll number 2, please, Sean. And we're going to start by just getting a sense of where are you all in terms of which method do you anticipate you're going to be using? And your options are A, you're figuring it out, totally legit. B, you're planning to use a third-party service. C, you're becoming credentialed to report directly to the bureaus. D, rent reporting functionality in property management or payment processing platform, or E, the tenant reporting using a third-party platform. Which one are you thinking about, still figuring it out, or one of the other options that we've talked about here? Just trying to get a sense of where you are. Make sure you click this little submit button in the lower right-hand corner. And of course, put your answer in the chat if you're not able to see those poll questions. Why don't you go ahead and wrap it up for us, please, Sean? See our results here in just a moment. So it looks like we're split pretty evenly between people who are planning on third-party reporting and those who are still figuring out what they want to do. For those who replied to the poll, it doesn't look like we've got anybody at this point in any of those latter three options. So those who are still figuring it out, anything that you would like to sort of share about what you're thinking about, what it is that you might like to ask your colleagues who've made a decision, any kind of questions or conversation you'd like to have in this community of practice as a place that you can ask those kinds of questions. And while you're thinking about whether you want to put something in the chat or come off mute, let me go back to a question that Carl put in here. I think maybe we'll come to you on this, Sam. He saw an advertisement that Experian Boost has an app and they're now adding rent reporting. They want to know, is that particular app going to be an option? I don't know if you're familiar with that, if you need to hear a little bit more, or if you have a response or need to table that. What's your thought?
Yeah, I'm gonna kind of have to acknowledge and apologize that I didn't come prepared to kind of go through like specific services and kind of either give advice or kind of give a judgment on specific services. But I certainly encourage you to explore it.
Yeah.
I'm not sure whether Allison or Elizabeth have anything to say in terms of what kind of role we might have in that.
I'm not familiar with Experian Boost specifically, but I know that a lot of the kind of advertisements you see on television and the internet and things are targeted at, a person to get their rent reported. So I think that would probably fall into that fourth category that Sam has up there. That it might be an option if you were one of the PHA designed option PHAs and you were planning rent reporting for voucher households, that might be an option. But yeah, like Sam said, if that's something that you're curious about, definitely bring it up in the kind of one-on-one conversations with the research team. But I'm pretty sure that's in that fourth category.
Yeah, this is Elizabeth. Sorry, I forgot to.
Please, Elizabeth, please.
I agree with like what Allison said. I was just quickly looking up Experian Boost, and it offers all different kinds of bills you can put in there. But it would be the tenant would have to do that themselves. And one of our ideas with doing public housing was that it would be simpler because the housing authority has the rent information and it doesn't have to be gathered from individuals or from individual landlords.
Great. Thank you, Elizabeth. I do know that HUD is precluded from actually providing recommendations about specific vendors that provide services. That's just something that as part of the government they can't do. But if any of you would like to share what you are thinking about the vendors that you are thinking about using in the chat, it's perfectly fine as a community of practice for you to share your own thoughts and experiences. So I'll just put that out there and you can share those if you're interested. While you do that, Sandra asks a question, which is, what is the ballpark cost for recording rents? Sam, I don't know if you have any of that information or if we might want to ask the group if anybody already has that information. Do you want to speak to that?
I think I'm going to need to throw that question out at either anyone, either Steve, Elizabeth, and Allison, or any of the folks who are at the PHAs who have actually explored this already and kind of know how much you're planning seeing as costs.
So I think, do we not have a PHA on right now who is already doing rent reporting? Maybe they can speak to this question.
Anybody able to share some thoughts?
So not to put you too much on the spot, but Jamila Hart, you wrote in the chat saying that you are already doing rent reporting.
Yeah, I'm sorry. Could you repeat the question?
Yeah, so people are wondering how much the fees are. And I remember I've spoken to a couple of different resources on this topic, and I remember that the main thing I learned was you generally have to do a contract for, say, 100 units or something like that. You can't just say, oh, I'm just doing 5, and you'll have to like cover your whole building, or even if only part of the building reports or something like that. So can you speak to that, Jamila, from your experiences?
Might have to. Let me. I'm not sure about the exact numbers. Let me just reach out and get some real numbers for you real quick here.
Okay.
That'd be great.
Let me figure that out. No.
Yeah, you just pop it in the chat when you have a chance to find it. And I'll also note that Mitzi shared in the chat a yearly license for $1,600 plus $2 per resident per month. So that is one ballpark. We can see if Jamila's is in that same general area. And, you know, obviously, as you talk to different vendors, you may get some different options.
So, but the question is, Mitzi, that $2 per resident per month, is there a minimum number of residents you need to pay that for, irrespective of how many actually want to do the rent reporting?
With that yearly license in place, that might cover it. But if you happen to know, Mitzi, please do share.
So I'm Melissa. I work with Mitzi, and we met with the company, and they made it seem like they would have to do the entire property, that they didn't know they were going to get back to us on doing a specific number of tenants.
Thank you, Melissa. Obviously, for the control and treatment group aspects of the study, that's something that we'll need to work with the researchers on and kind of think about if that is where they're going. Great. Anybody else looked into these, please?
Yeah, I was just going to say preliminarily that doesn't necessarily raise concerns for me for positive only reporting, at least, because I think it would mean that you're just not reporting, but we'll have to kind of look into the mechanics and make sure that we actually understand how that works.
Anybody else investigated and have any thoughts to share? This is an area where, as you get more information, it may be useful to kind of share information with the others in this cohort who are going in this direction. Jamila, if you have a chance to pop something in the chat, please do, or you can come off mute later and just fill us in if you've been able to find some information.
Yeah, I'm just waiting for a text back here.
Absolutely, not rushing you, just giving you permission.
I could make something up that I decided not to do that.
And Jamila, if you're not able to get the information on this call, also no pressure at all.
Yeah.
Just whatever you can find out is helpful, and if not, then we totally understand.
Yeah, absolutely, absolutely. All right, Sam, with that one, I turn it back over to you.
Great, thank you. So moving on to the next slide, I think wanted to talk a little bit about ways to kind of maximize kind of the impact of rent reporting, or how you can kind of make sure that the people who you're reporting rent for may see the biggest kind of positive effect on their credit scores. So the first thing is report past payments to the extent allowed by credit agency. So I think some or all of you may be aware of this already, but when for the most part in when you're doing rent reporting and somebody enrolls and is assigned to the group that is you're actually going to do the reporting for, you will be able to immediately report a certain amount of their history. So it's not just starting with their next rent payment or something like that. And generally, we've seen it as being up to 24 months of past 24 months of past rent payments that can be reported. And so what that means is that if you've got some residents who have a long history of making their payments on time and don't have a kind of pre-existing credit history, like they could see an immediate and dramatic result. So we kind of encourage you to take advantage of the ability to report as much of the past history as possible. Number 2, following consumer-friendly best practices, like not reporting small unpaid balances. Now that's going to kind of be one of those things that depends on sort of what's required by the third party or the agency that you're working with. But the point is, don't report just the small balances if you don't have to give a little bit of leeway. And of course, that is, that's if you're doing full file reporting. If you're doing positive only reporting, you're not going to have to report that anyway. Number 3, develops procedures for suspending rent payments when residents are legally withholding rent or rent can no longer be legally collected due to eviction proceedings. So I think it's going to be important for you to think through with your legal team what those processes are going to be. We don't, there aren't specific recommendations, but the general guidance is to suspend rent reporting in those situations. And then finally, provide complete data whenever available. So it's kind of common in rent reporting data that there are fields that are left out, that things just haven't been filled in. And that can sometimes have a big effect on credit scores, especially again, if we're doing full file reporting, because age of credit accounts is an important factor in the credit score calculations. And so, if you are doing full file reporting and you have somebody who kind of, has missed a payment and you haven't entered the data on there, right? It might end up that the calculation of the credit score kind of thinks that it's a long unpaid debt instead of a recent unpaid debt or something. So just kind of encouraging you to make sure that when you start the reporting, you're actually kind of careful to provide complete data. And I think this is another place where I'm handing back to Janet for some questions.
Yeah, great, Sam. I think it's important to kind of look at these ideas as they come up instead of asking people to retain all these bits and pieces in their head. So that's why we're doing the conversation as we go. So in terms of how you're going to maximize the impact of what you're trying to do with this program, what kinds of either thoughts have you had? What are you planning to do to really maximize? Or do you have any questions about those bullets that Sam has put up there, things that don't necessarily make sense to you or you've never heard of before and you want to know a bit more about? What are your thoughts about how you're going to maximize this impact of rent reporting? Feel free to put in the chat or just come on off mute and go ahead and say what you're thinking. For example, any of you thought about suspending rent if there's legally withholding rent? Have you considered what that's going to look like? While you're thinking, Mitzi is commenting that she didn't understand the last point about providing complete data whenever possible. You want to tackle that one again, Sam?
To the best that I can, I'm kind of passing on information that we've learned from conversations with experts, but my understanding is that, when the rent reporting happens, you will be filling information into a form, and kind of happens in the same way that may happen all the time when you're kind of just like, tracking a lot of data for a lot of people who you're serving, that some things don't get filled out. And I think the cases where we saw where that kind of had created or that we had been described to us where that, could create a big problem is when dates aren't entered board dates aren't entered correctly, and it ends up looking like people are like long overdue on rent instead of just being a month overdue on rent or something like that. So the kind of the basic message here, and I'm afraid I'm not going to be able to get kind of too specific on it, but the basic message is that like be careful to be providing kind of as much information and as accurate information in the process of actually doing the rent reporting as you can to kind of avoid those kinds of mistakes.
Okay, so that cleared it up, Sam. Thank you very much. Any other thoughts on any of these elements? Not reporting the small unpaid balances, suspending when there's a legal withholding of rent. Have a lot more thinking to do before we get there. I'll just turn to Jamila's comment, which is, I think it helps to have an education component of enrollment where you talk about how credit can help save money and et cetera. Great observation, Jamila. Yeah.
I think Jamila has a copy of our slides and is reading ahead.
Yeah, I think we can go on and have a little conversation about that if you like. This might be just the right time. What do you think, Sam?
Yeah, that'd be great.
All righty. Oh, actually, hang on 1 minute. We'll back it up and go there in just a minute, Jamila. Julie did comment, if we're only positively reporting rent, it seems like having a control group is unnecessary. Couldn't we just offer the benefit to everyone and compare before and after credit scores to evaluate the program?
I'm afraid it doesn't work that way for a few reasons. You know, one is that there's a lot of things that kind of go on in people's lives, and some of them kind of might affect both groups in the same way. So that, like, you know, let's say the economy is doing particularly well and more people are kind of getting jobs or getting some sort of income or something that they didn't have before, and that might really help their credit scores. It might have nothing to do with the fact that you're doing the rent reporting or not. You know, when we are trying to look at specifically what is the effect of the rent reporting itself, whether it be a positive only or whether it be the full file, we kind of need to have two groups that are where one is getting the reporting and one isn't. And it's not tied to the fact that it's positive only versus full file reporting. I'm happy for any of for Steve or Elizabeth or Allison to jump in if you have a kind of another way to say the same thing that I just did.
I don't think I have another way to say it, but I could say that if you just look at change over time, you don't have a comparison group, you don't really know what the causes are of the change. There's just no way to know. You have to have a comparison group that is, you know, ideally exactly like your treatment group, and except for not doing the rent reporting. Otherwise, it could be, you know, other things that really common causes of change over time are aging or larger macroeconomic trends.
Yeah.
You know, and be able to take to know.
Yeah, imagine a world where you know, the program starts and then there's a recession. And then at the end of the study, oh, look, the credit scores went down. So the program was a failure. Well, maybe the program, in fact, was not a failure, because the reason that the program scores went down isn't because of the program, it's because of the recession. And in fact, in the absence of the program, maybe the credit scores would have gone down even further. The only real way we get access to that what if, which science researchers call the counterfactual, is by sort of constructing this sort of design. Even if you saw a positive, improvement over time. Saying, what percentage of that was just sort of natural and would have happened over time anyway, and what percentage of it was a result of the program would be impossible to disentangle. So that's really why we're doing it. If you're thinking this idea also, it's positive only, so it has to be good. As we said, there are at least some possibilities under which some people might actually not do well, under the program. They might not benefit much, or they might even sort of maybe lose their credit score might go down a little bit. We don't think that's going to be particularly common, but in a world where all those sorts of people are the ones that excitedly join up in the program, that's an interesting thing that we just learned, right? Which is that when you make this program freely available to people, maybe the sorts of people who are going to benefit most from it are not the ones who come forward. So, there's a lot that we're trying to understand in doing this. And certainly positive only is a way to minimize unnecessary risk, but it doesn't really answer the questions that we're trying to answer by itself.
Well, I mean, the question wasn't positive only. The question was, can you just do it before and after? Just look at change over time without a comparison group.
So I think that gives the research perspective on why control groups are so essential. And, I think if people have additional questions and want to really kind of dig into that, those one-on-one discussions with your research team will be a good way to do that. It is an important question to ask. If you're going to put the time into being part of a group that's doing treatment and controls, you want to really have a good feel for why this is a good idea. And I'm sure Sam, Steve, and company will help you get to that full understanding as needed. Okay, want to go ahead to the next slide, Sam?
Yeah, great. This, as I've been alluding to before, this kind of gets at some of the question that Jamila was raising. So we do think that coupling rent reporting with financial empowerment services can be beneficial to residents. So obviously this slide here kind of has two potential ways that you can kind of be doing that. And I'll say it was actually like in the previous pilots of rent reporting programs that we've looked at, they usually have included some type of financial coaching or counseling. And the kind of takeaways from those earlier pilots was that it actually was a key part of the program's success. The two examples that we have here, financial coaching, and some or all of you may already be familiar with this, but just to kind of draw the distinction between what's the difference between financial coaching and counseling or credit counseling. So financial coaching encourages participants to kind of take the lead in determining what they want to get out of it. They kind of set their own goals and then work with the coach to kind of achieve their goals. And that kind of stands in contrast to a more traditional counseling model, which is more led by the counselor, where the goals are kind of defined by the counseling model. And then in particular with credit counseling, the focus there will be on not on kind of goals in general, but would be focused on credit, debt management, and budgeting. That said, I mean, I think either approach could be a good addition to the rent reporting program. I think another one that's kind of come up that I just want to acknowledge because it's come up in some conversations that we had, housing counseling, and there I just want to say that I think for the most part, it may not be the phase at which you're working with people on the rent reporting. It may not be the same phase at which people are kind of going to be like on the verge of becoming homeowners. I think it would be kind of future looking. So it may not align exactly. And I think the one other thing that I'd add is that if you're offering some of these services in addition to the rent reporting, that will be something that you can kind of use in messaging about the program and recruitment and enrollment, and kind of having the staff who are involved in recruitment and enrollment kind of understanding the basics of financial empowerment might be a strategy to kind of get people interested in the programs. So I think one last poll.
One last poll indeed, and then we'll come to some of the material in the chat. So Sean, why don't you go ahead and pull up poll number 3. This one, again, we're really interested in what you are thinking about right now in this space that Sam has been talking about. So what kinds of financial empowerment services do you plan to offer? So planning to offer coaching, credit counseling, you don't know yet what you want to do, or you're really not planning to offer any kind of financial empowerment services. Go ahead and pick your choice and then make sure you click on the submit button in the lower right-hand corner. Give you a minute. Coaching, credit counseling, don't know yet, or none of the above. Sean, when those answers slow down, go ahead and give us our results. It's like a pretty even split here of those who answered. We've got 6 planning on coaching, 5 planning on credit counseling, and 7 don't know yet. So pretty widespread. So of those who are planning to do one of the coaching or credit, or pardon me, those who don't know yet which you're planning to do, what kinds of questions are you debating as you decide what to do? Anything specific that might be useful to hear from people who've already made their decisions? For those of you who have made your decisions, what really swayed you one way or the other? What made you decide to do the coaching? What made you decide to do the credit counseling? Might be helpful to others to kind of hear a bit of your thought process. Fine to just come off mute if you want to. Fine to write into the chat. So Sunny is writing in to say that coaching aligns with the work of the Ross SC program. Sunny, are you able to come off mute and just say a few more words about that? If you're not, that's fine, but if you can, it'd be great.
I don't know. Can you hear me?
Yes.
Okay. Yeah, so we have the Ross Service Coordinator program, and this was something we had been looking at prior to even being accepted into moving to work. So it's a natural fit for us with the work that our Ross Service Coordinator is doing. We were going to kind of move down this path anyway. Taking some financial coaching classes is one of her personal goals, professional goals. So it makes a lot of sense to utilize the coaching aspect as we work to help our families become involved and prepare for building their credit.
Thank you so much. Mitzi, if you're able to come off for a moment and talk about, it sounds like you're also looking at the Ross and also FSS processes. Not everybody's able to come off mute, so we'll see if Mitzi's able to.
Hi, it's Mitzi. We already offer these programs for our residents, so it will enhance their opportunity for success. So it will be something that we're planning to use in conjunction with the rent reporting.
Okay. So credit and financial coaching. And then Sandra is saying that the agency that they are considering working with offers the financial coaching, and that obviously can be a contributing factor to how you make that choice. Anybody else have any thoughts or observations on that front? Okay. We're going to just turn to a general question and answer now on our next slide. And so I guess I would just come back for a moment to the chat. So Jamila was able to find the information about what they pay. They've got a $3,500 a year flat fee for their platform. which is the Isuzu Run platform. So thanks for looking that up, Jamila. And Sandra followed up with a question about what was the number of households for that 3,500. Jamila, this is not a pop quiz to see how well you've memorized your numbers, but if you happen to have that information, welcome to share it.
I'm not sure if that fee is because we were part of a pilot project a while back with Isuzu, so I'm not sure if that's like a standard, but we're a mid-sized housing authority, 545 public housing units and 1,700-ish voucher holders. So yeah, so I don't know for sure if that's standard or not. So yeah.
Great. Thank you very much for sharing that.
Yeah.
And at this sort of general pause place, I think I can come back to a question that Jamila had actually posed early on. We just moved past quite the moment to talk to it when I saw it. The question is, does doing the design option MTW make a difference in terms of structuring our rent reporting program as a study? We already had a pre-existing rent reporting program we were hoping to expand as part of MTW. Could doing the design option exempt us from doing the study, as they already have 50 residents currently enrolled in rent reporting? So Allison, maybe I can get you to kind of comment on that, and Jamila, just stay at the ready in case Allison's got any questions for you.
Yeah, I think this is a really good thing to talk about in those one-on-one conversations with the research team. We understand that the PHA designed option, you may have proposed some things that are a little different than what might have been in the, option, I believe it was 2 in the selection notice under the regular rent reporting option. So we want to be sure to, respect those differences. At the same time, we want you to be a part of the evaluation, and the evaluation is, an important part of the cohort for all the agencies that are a part of the cohort. So I think kind of with your individual situation, it'd be best to talk with the research team out how to incorporate your unique situation as a PHA designed option, and how that could best, fit with some of the research. But there may be slight differences with agencies in the PHA designed option that, we'll need to account for.
Thanks, Allison. I'm going to be going in a minute to another section talking about outreach and engagement, but let's reflect back on the things we've been talking about so far. Anything that's coming to mind, either that you feel like you have learned something in your journey to getting ready for this activity that you'd like to share with people, or something you'd like to ask your colleagues? This is your community of practice, your colleagues who can share information. Anything you'd like to discuss here while we have each other and the opportunity? And again, feel free to just come off mute and speak. Sometimes that's way faster than trying to figure out how to type it out. Okay. Think of anything while we go through this next section, just pop it into the chat. We'll have a chance to look at anything that comes in when we get to our next break point. So I'll turn it back to you there, Sam.
Thank you. So yeah, this is the last section of the presentation. And I think, as you can tell from the title, we're focused on outreach and engagement. So next slide, please. So on this slide, we just want to kind of raise the question of who you should recruit. And I kind of want to put that in context based on something that Steve had already said earlier. So it's a requirement of the selection notice that everybody, at least everybody in the public housing is eligible to participate in rent reporting. And as we kind of talked about before, you would be doing kind of an open recruitment, and then they will decide whether to kind of follow up and choose to enroll in the study, at which point there would be the random assignment. But I think the message that you're giving out there to try to recruit people can be a little bit focused on the idea of who is likely to benefit the most from this. So like, you know, you can be giving a message out there to kind of to try to really appeal to the people who kind of might have the most to gain by being part of the rent reporting. And so what we have on this slide is a little bit of things that you can kind of take into account as you're thinking about how to message it, and as you're thinking about like, you know, who you might tell would be most likely to kind of get the biggest benefit from it. So, likely to benefit the most. I mean, one thing that I should say is that at a baseline, residents have to be paying at least some rent, although the amount will depend on the credit bureau, and it might be as low as $10. So there may be some, although we're saying everybody is eligible for this, there may be some kinds of restrictions that are put on by your partner, who's a third-party partner, or by the credit bureaus that you're working with. So that's the one caveat that I'm going to throw into that. But with that said, the people who are most likely to benefit are going to be those who have little or no credit history, those who already, you know, do have a credit history and a credit score, but their credit score is low, as well as those with an established history of on-time payments. And on that last point, you know, I think what I alluded to this before, I described this before, that most of these situations you're going to be able to immediately report up to 24 months of the person's payment history. And so if you've got somebody who doesn't have a credit score, has a low credit score, but also has an established history of on-time payments, they may see an immediate impact from it. On the flip side, for those who already have established and high credit scores, they're going to be likely to, you know, they may be less likely to kind of see a big change in their credit score as a result of rent reporting. But one thing to kind of, and part of the reason for that is that, you know, if they've got a pre-existing history and that history is actually pretty good and there's a lot of positive information, you'll be adding a little bit of positive information by documenting their rent payments, but, you know, it's going to be a small part of what's kind of already there. So that's the reason why they might be likely to see fewer benefits, although they could still see benefits from it. And then finally, just want to kind of make sure that we're clear that, you know, even those who have a history of some late payments can benefit from rent reporting. So if you've got somebody who has the 24-month history and there are some late payments in there, especially if you're doing positive only, you will be, you know, there's still opportunities for them to benefit from rent reporting. A couple of things to kind of note. One is that credit score changes of around 20 points may occur for some participants, but that's kind of typical. Like, credit scores fluctuate a little bit within that range anyway. And so kind of seeing those changes may or may not be a result of the rent reporting. And it's also like changes of that score, you know, may be unlikely to meaningfully impact participants' access unless it really meets a threshold of moving from one credit tier to another. So just kind of want to set expectations there that you might see a little bit of changes in people's credit scores that you know, at the beginning that may or may not kind of make a big difference. All right, and then the next slide. Yeah, thank you. So in terms of best practices for outreach, rent reporting pilots that have happened before have kind of found that their messaging works better when they focus not just on the idea of improving credit, but that they focus on like what you can actually get out of improved credit. And so we kind of encourage you to think about focusing the message on the larger goal of financial inclusion. This kind of ties back to stuff that Steve was saying earlier about what the benefits of improved credit scores might be. You know, I think we also really kind of encourage you to, you know, think about what that actually means for your particular residents. I think talk with them, kind of understand kind of what they see as being kind of the benefits for them, the potential benefits for them, and how credit is relevant in their lives. And it can be things, about how it affects their ability to kind of buy a car, or it can be something, it could be kind of making clear to them how credit scores may show up in jobs, when they're applying for jobs. But you may also have residents who are, seniors and aren't interested in home ownership or buying a new car, may not be looking for a job, but we found an example as we looked at past research on this of one project where what they found was that the credit was still relevant to their senior residents because many of them used a phone plan that required a deposit from people who didn't have high credit scores. So again, kind of look into what is going to be relevant to the particular residents that you're working with. Second, address data security and privacy concerns. This is just kind of a general sensitivity to the fact that residents may have hesitancy about the privacy of their data. They might have concern about what information they're sharing with you, with the PHAs, with coaches, with counselors, with government agencies, and not so much a kind of specific recommendation here as much as just to say be sensitive to that and recognize it may be something that you need to address when you're doing outreach. Third, use existing touch points with residents. So you can integrate promotion of participating in the rent reporting into touch points like recertification or lease renewal. And then finally, leverage resident social networks, which I think we just have found, and it's kind of clear that a lot of the time when programs are trying to enroll people in something new, that they may not kind of have an immediate recognition of why they want to be part of it. That if they hear that, a friend or someone who they kind of respect within their social networks is already part of it, it makes them feel a lot more comfortable with the idea of participating too. Yeah, I think that's it. Lots of discussion.
Great, Sam. So I know last week when we talked with the other half of this cohort, we had some pretty robust conversation around outreach and recruitment and thinking about what that might look like. So interested in hearing from this group, maybe thinking about recruitment first. What are you thinking about how you're planning to recruit participants? Are you planning to do any kind of targeting in your outreach? If you do want to do that, what are you thinking about? And it may be that some of you haven't gotten yet to thinking about how this recruitment is going to work, in which case, what questions do you have? What are you wrestling with still? And I'll give folks a moment to come off mute if you like. That's certainly the easiest here, but welcome to type in the chat if you're not in a place where you can speak. What are your plans for recruiting? What are you thinking about?
This is Sunny in Twin Falls, and recruiting for a lot of things is a challenge for a small PHA because residents are kind of in their own routine of what they like to do anyway, and so don't come out for a lot of things and are skeptical of you, like you've talked about, of sharing information. But I think we refer to some of the same tried and true techniques of phone calls or flyers. That type of thing. Recently, however, I had a conversation with one of the VPs at Urban Strategies, and they are focusing on credit building as well. And that's what our focus is in this cohort. And so I thought it might be interesting to continue that dialogue with Urban Strategies to see what type of, pamphlets and things like that they could make available to us that might have a brighter, prettier, flashier touch to them than what we would typically use. And so just to share with the panelists It is Urban Strategies that is focusing on credit building for households in poverty. Although they aren't specifically looking at small agencies, I think there's opportunity for some of us that may be smaller to reach out to them and get some assistance.
Great, thanks, Sunny. Yeah, thinking about, are there ways to get some support for agencies in their outreach? And Urban Strategies might be one, there might be some others. That's great, thank you. Sunny mentioned, there might be some hesitancy among residents. Do others feel like you're anticipating you're going to encounter some hesitancy? And have you thought about what you might do with that? Or do you feel like people are going to jump on board and hesitancy is not really an issue for you?
This is Melissa. I have a question in regards to, you mentioned earlier at the beginning of the presentation about not excluding elderly or disabled families from this. So our outreach efforts, should they be to the entire agency, to all of our federal properties? What are your thoughts on that?
Sam, you want to take that?
To the best I can, but it may be something also that Allison might want to jump in on. But yeah, I mean, I think unless you're one of the PHA designed option sites, like it would be to all of your properties. Yeah, people, residents of your properties. So not to voucher folks, because if you're in the non-PHA designed option, it doesn't cover vouchers. But yes, you can do the outreach to everybody. I think the point that there were kind of 2 points that in our presentation that we're trying to balance. One, which is that everybody is eligible for this, and you shouldn't be kind of targeting at the exclusion of anybody, including the elderly. But you can also kind of focus your message on the idea of what do you have to gain from this, and so that message that may not land the same way with everybody, but I would kind of like you don't have to kind of compensate for that. Like some people do actually have more to potentially gain from this than others.
Okay, thank you. Yeah, we don't obviously want to violate any fair housing laws, and we want to make sure we're including those properties with elderly and disabled as well. So thank you.
And there's no there's no quota, so nobody's going to look at who came forward and was recruited and say, this population looks different from, the broader population that you serve. If it does, that's interesting from a research perspective, but it's not, in any way, a way that we're evaluating whether you did marketing correctly. So that's not something to worry about.
Sunny, I see in the chat you are raising a really important point about trust and the role that trust can play in recruitment and implementation of the program. You want to come off mute for a minute and just talk about what you've seen, and we can see if others have similar thoughts about their communities?
I think I had mentioned in there about households who may be from other countries. We are a city who has a lot of refugees, and they aren't familiar with our credit system. And interestingly enough, our credit system actually only began to be used in 1989 anyway. So it's really about educating and earning the trust. And I don't think, when we talk about why people may be hesitant, trust isn't built through flyers. So I just talked about, partnering with other organizations to have better things to share and to send out. But when building trust, usually I think that's done face to face. And luckily we have a Ross service coordinator that I think is really good face to face with those individuals, as are other staff members. So I think we're going to have to rely on that quite a bit as well.
Thanks for that, Sunny. Others, have you given thought to the trust building issues and how you're going to manage that? whether you have communities of people who are from other countries or people who simply aren't familiar with our credit reporting systems. What have others thought? Do you second those opinions? Do you have different ideas? Anybody else planning to do one-on-one conversations for your recruitment? Yeah, Sandra is just seconding the point, Sunny. As there's always the trade-off of the recruitment time involved and yet the one-on-one touch that helps earn that trust. It's a great point, Sunny.
Yeah, I was also going to kind of second that. I think it's a really great point. And kind of hearing you describe it, in some ways, I think it kind of coincides with some of the things that I've been saying on the earlier slide, where if you've got this ROS program where you already are actually having touch points with people, like that seems like a kind of ideal opportunity to take advantage of one-on-ones that you might be having already to kind of help people understand why it might be something that they might be interested in participating in. I'll also say that I think one of the things that we're looking forward to that would be kind of something that the researchers can learn from this experience is kind of how this stuff plays out in different PHAs that are working with different groups of people who kind of have different backgrounds, different different conditions and everything. And I think part of the research will be kind of what's called an implementation study, which is really kind of like making sure that we understand like what happened on the ground, at your PHA and at each of the PHAs that are part of the study.
I'm just curious if people feel like you're going to have challenges engaging the 50 people you're trying to get minimum, for your control and treatment groups. Are you feeling like, gosh, this is going to be tough? Are you feeling like, yeah, no problem, people are going to sign up? Where are you on that scale? Do you see challenges there? You just pop it into the chat if you want to. I see challenges, won't be a problem for our PHA. And I know there are 40 of you on the call, so a couple of you pop something in the chat there for us. You think it's going to be a challenge to get people to engage and sign up? So I'm seeing a couple of people saying they actually don't think it's going to be all that difficult to engage people for this, which is great. There's not much to say if you feel like, yeah, this is not a problem, which is wonderful for your PHA. Is that great? Anybody think you are going to have a problem? All right, the outreach piece is easy peasy and done, you guys. I'm teasing on that. Obviously, the research, the outreach is always a challenge, and doing it well, as Sunny was describing, and others is something to really pay attention to as we go forward. Okay. Any other questions about anything we covered in this session? This is your chance to just raise questions that might affect the way the researchers are thinking about the design. Anything that you're concerned about that we didn't touch on?
I encourage you guys, like, you have the opportunity to ask us questions in the one-on-one, but if you're kind of holding back because of that, like, hearing it now would really help us to be able to be prepared to answer the question when we have the one-on-one with you. So please, like, feel free to kind of share the questions now, even if we can't kind of give you an immediate answer.
Mitzi has one here. Is the goal to have at least 50 sign up?
I think the numbers kind of differ by the plans that you guys submitted when you signed up for the MTW cohort, but that was that was the minimum for kind of the study enrollments, with the 50% being, I think the goal is for 25% to have rent reporting happen for them. So when you take into account that that's 50% of the enrollment into the study, that would be 50 signing up.
25 households.
$25. So, and just to clarify that, are we looking for an offer? So we have at least 25 households that are available for random selection, or do they need 50 households for random selection so they have 25 that get enrolled in the treatment group?
Exactly. Yeah, I thought, Sam, I heard 25%. So I just wanted to clarify that that was households and not percent.
Janet,
25 households.
You need at least 50 households to volunteer to get a random selection of 25. But of course, more households would be much better.
Okay, so I think all saying the same thing. In order to get to the 25 households that you're doing the reporting for with the random selection, you need to have 50 households that are engaged. So you can choose 25 for your treatment, 25 for your control. And more, always better. There we go. As Elizabeth said. So good question, Mitzi. Want everybody to be really clear about that. Thank you. Anything else? Okay. Liz is putting in a question saying we chose a PHA design program. So most of her questions have to do with which requirements apply to them and what flexibility they have. What's the right venue for Liz to get her questions answered, Allison?
I think, yeah, in those meetings individually with the research team, similar to what I said to Jamila's question, we understand that there may be, certain intricacies with your PHA designed option that may not directly fit into what we're talking about today, but it's our hope that you will be a meaningful part of the evaluation. So working on how to strike that balance, I think, is a great conversation with the research team to try and talk through those issues.
Great, thanks. So if you're like me and you think of your question as soon as the call ends, remember that you do have the Asset Building Cohort email box. Welcome to send your questions there. If you have questions that could really affect how the research design is working, that would allow the research team to understand the questions and come prepared to answer the question when they do meet with you. Of course, you can just talk to the research team when you have those meetings in the coming weeks. So got multiple ways to get your questions answered. And I think unless there's anything else, we can go to our next slide. All right, so that was the last of the research focused sessions for this community of practice. I'll give a big shout out to MEF and ABT Associates for putting these together for you. It's been a great series to get your questions answered and dig into how the research is going to work. We will be returning in our next session to thinking about the overall onboarding series for the cohort. The next two sessions, we're going to be really focusing on the MTW supplement and the public process. So we'll really dig into what the process looks like there on February 22nd. And then on March 15th, we'll be giving you some tips and tricks for trying to make that supplement really clear and compelling so you can get it through and approved without too much back and forth. So we'll be doing those next. We'll then move on to the 50058 MTW expansion form and try to get real clear with you about what's required there. Then on the 26th, we'll have an office hour, really open opportunity for questions on any topic that we've covered during the whole onboarding series, whatever it is that you're worrying about. And then after that, we will be scheduling additional communities of practice, giving this group an opportunity to come back together and focus on some of those topic areas that you told us in our exploratory session back before the holidays were going to be important to you as you develop your program. So we will be developing those and putting those on the schedule once we get through the end of the onboarding. So with that, I think that's a wrap. Many, many thanks to the presenters. Many thanks to all of you who have been sharing your information with us generously on the call. Very much appreciate your participation. And I look forward to seeing you in a couple of weeks. Thank you.